Have you ever laid in the dark at 2 a.m., your body heavy like lead, completely exhausted, but your mind is racing at 1,000 miles an hour? That feeling of being tired but wired, it is a modern epidemic. We spend a third of our lives unconscious, yet so many of us wake up feeling like we haven't rested at all. The medical data on this is actually terrifying. We are looking at a global crisis of rest, where chronic sleep deprivation is now directly linked to neurodegenerative diseases. Our brains are quite literally suffocating in their own metabolic waste because we have forgotten how to truly shut down. But I often wonder about the very nature of this shutdown. What if the way we sleep is entirely wrong? What if sleep was never meant to be an unconscious blackout, just a dark, empty gap in your existence? What if sleep was originally designed to be a highly conscious, deliberate biological reboot? I still can't quite wrap my head around it sometimes, whether we are simply meant to power off like a broken machine, or if there's a hidden mechanism in our biology that we are completely ignoring. Most people think of deep meditation as something you do sitting up, fighting through physical discomfort while trying to force your mind to be quiet. If I'm being completely honest, I think treating meditation solely as a waking exercise is missing a massive piece of the puzzle. There is an ancient technology, documented thousands of years ago, known as jhana, meditative absorption. Usually, we hear about it in the context of monks in deep Himalayan caves or forest retreats. But what the ancient texts hint at, and what modern biohackers are just beginning to stumble upon, is that jhana is not just a waking mental state, it is a profound biological protocol. It is a technology designed to hack the sleep cycle itself. When you learn how to cross the threshold of sleep without losing consciousness, you trigger a physiological response that most human beings will never experience. You bypass the chaotic, exhausting dream states entirely. You enter a space where the physical body paralyzes itself for cellular repair, but the mind remains luminous, awake, and anchored in pure stillness. Over the course of this journey, we are going to dissect exactly how this works. We'll start with the ancient blueprints, looking deep into Buddhist cosmology to understand the architecture of the mind and what actually happens to our consciousness when the body falls asleep. Then, we are going completely into the hard science. We are going to map this ancient wisdom directly onto modern neuroscience. We are going to look at the glymphatic system, brainwave states, the parasympathetic override, and the quantum biology of cellular energy. I have spent a massive amount of time digging through clinical journals and translating ancient Pali texts to connect these dots. But I know there are people listening right now who understand clinical neurobiology, or perhaps the deep nuances of the Abhidhamma, far better than I do. I am deeply fascinated to know how those of you with that specific expertise view this intersection of spirit and science. By the time we finish this exploration, your bedroom will no longer just be a place where you collapse at the end of the day out of sheer exhaustion. You will begin to look at your bed as a laboratory for spiritual and physical evolution. If you had to choose just one word to describe what you truly want from your sleep tonight, I wonder what that would be. For me, right now, it is regeneration.
When you think about the physical act of going to bed, what does it look like? We toss, we turn, we curl up into fetal positions, we seek a soft surface to absorb our exhaustion. We use the mattress as an escape hatch from the waking world. But if you look deeply into the ancient texts, there is a very specific, almost deliberate architecture to how an awakened being rests. It is called the Sīhaseyyā, the lion's posture. The instruction is precise, lying on the right side, one foot resting slightly on the other. It looks incredibly simple on the surface, but it is not just a physical pose. It is a psychological fortress. I remember the first time I tried to force myself to sleep strictly in this lion's posture. It was a complete disaster. I was rigid, overthinking every single breath, fighting the urge to roll over, and I ended up significantly more exhausted than before I went to bed. I had to learn the hard way that the posture is just the external container. The real heavy lifting happens entirely inside the mind. I suspect anyone who has ever tried to radically change a deeply ingrained biological habit has hit that exact same wall of frustration. Why the right side? Why hold such a specific disciplined posture when the body is begging to just collapse? Because the goal was never to collapse. The blueprint left behind by the Buddha requires lying down with sati, which is active mindfulness, and sampajanya, which translates to clear comprehension. The practice is to establish a mental note of the exact time you intend to wake up, and then you hold a delicate but unbreakable thread of awareness as the body powers down. You do not fall asleep. You watch the body fall asleep. You maintain a continuous luminous line of consciousness right through the biological shutdown, navigating the hypnagogic state all the way until the moment your eyes open again in the morning. If I'm being entirely blunt about this, I believe that 99% of what we call normal sleep is just a biologically enforced coma of delusion. We surrender our awareness completely to the dark because we simply think we have to. But the ancient texts suggest something incredibly provocative. Losing consciousness is not a biological absolute. It's just a bad habit of an untrained mind. There's a fascinating historical account involving King Pasenadi. He comes to the Buddha, bewildered and exhausted. Pasenadi was a powerful king, surrounded by unimaginable luxury, sleeping on the finest silks, yet he was plagued by severe anxiety, tossing and turning in the night. He essentially asks how a fully enlightened being rests in the dirt or on a bed of leaves without suffering. The answer wasn't about finding a softer bed or a better sleep environment. It was about the architecture of the mind. When the mind is entirely free from the fetters of craving, fear, and clinging, sleep is no longer a heavy, dark veil of ignorance. It becomes light. But the story that truly haunts me, in the best way possible, is that of Venerable Anuruddha. He was one of the Buddha's elite disciples, renowned for possessing the divine eye, the ability to see across vast cosmic dimensions. According to the texts, Anuruddha essentially conquered ordinary sleep. For decades, he did not lose consciousness. When his physical biology reached its limit and required rest, he didn't black out. He simply shifted his awareness into deep meditative absorption. He rested in pure light. His physical cells regenerated, his organs repaired themselves, but his core awareness never flickered out. He turned the biological necessity of rest into a continuous state of high-frequency observation. I've spent a long time piecing together the mechanics of this from the Pali Canon and ancient commentaries, but I am absolutely certain there are deep practitioners or scholars listening right now who know the subtle nuances of Anuruddha's specific practice far better than I do. The exact mechanics of how he maintained the divine eye while the physical body paralysized itself in sleep is a profound mystery that I am still trying to fully decode. Think about the implications of that for a moment. To never truly be unconscious again, to experience total physical restoration without ever entering the dark void of ignorance. It makes me wonder if we actually managed to conquer this, if we stopped losing a third of our lives to the darkness of unconscious sleep, would we still be entirely human? Or does the mastery of the night fundamentally change what we become during the day? If you had to drop a single word to describe the idea of your mind staying completely awake while your body sleeps, I wonder what it would be. For me, the word is liberating, but I can easily see how for others it might be terrifying.
So, how exactly does this happen? If we step away from the stories of ancient monks for a moment and look directly at the underlying mechanics, what is actually taking place inside the machinery of the mind when the lights go out? To understand the reboot sequence, we have to look at the Abhidhamma. If the early Buddhist texts are the philosophy, the Abhidhamma is the raw, unapologetic back-end code of reality. It maps out human consciousness with a terrifying level of precision. Let me ask you something. When you fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, where do you go? You aren't seeing, you aren't hearing, you aren't tasting, touching, or smelling. You aren't even thinking. The ego, the identity of who you believe you are, completely dissolves. So if the senses are turned off and the thoughts are gone, what exactly keeps you alive? What is holding the thread of your existence?
The ancients called it the Bhavanga-citta, the life-continuum consciousness. Think of it like the deep, silent hum of an engine idling in neutral. It is the baseline frequency of your existence. When all your sensory inputs shut down at night, your active mind stops, and you drop into the Bhavanga. This is the hidden basement of the mind. Everyone goes there every single night. But here's the critical difference between us and an awakened being. For the vast majority of humanity, when we drop into sleep out of sheer exhaustion, we plunge into a state completely saturated with a mental factor called Moha. Moha translates to delusion, ignorance, or a heavy dullness. Because we spend our waking hours distracted, stressed, and disconnected, our version of the Bhavanga is thick, it is murky, it is a heavy, unconscious blackout. We wake up groggy because we've just spent the last 8 hours submerged in the dark, chaotic sludge of our own unchecked unconsciousness. We didn't rest, we just temporarily died to the world. But imagine a different scenario. What if you don't drop into sleep out of sheer exhaustion? What if you initiate the sleep cycle while holding a razor-sharp state of samadhi? The texts describe something absolutely breathtaking here. When a mind polished by deep meditative absorption enters the sleep state, the Bhavanga does not turn dark, it transforms. Because the mind is free from the heavy gravity of Moha, the life continuum becomes intensely luminous. The physical body paralyzes itself, the brain initiates its chemical repair cycles, but the consciousness itself glows. You are quite literally bathing your biology in a state of high-frequency light. I've spent a long time poring over the Abhidhamma's explanation of these mind moments, trying to understand how consciousness arises and falls at lightning speed while the body sleeps. But I know for a fact that there are deep Abhidhamma scholars and practitioners listening to this right now who understand the micromechanics of the mind far more intimately than I ever could. I am incredibly curious to know how those of you with that deep textual background interpret the exact transition point where a normal, heavy sleep consciousness flips into this luminous samadhi. And as I think about this, I cannot help but wonder something else. If we are completely unaware of who we are in the dark, heavy sleep of Moha, but we are profoundly awake in the luminous sleep of samadhi, which one is our true default state? Are we fundamentally beings of light who've just gotten really good at being unconscious? Or are we fundamentally unconscious beings trying desperately to find the light? I still cannot find a definitive answer for myself on that one. We have looked at the hidden architecture of the mind, that silent basement of the Bhavanga. But to truly understand the scale of what we are dealing with, we have to zoom out. We have to stop looking at the brain as an isolated organ and start looking at the human body for what it actually is. It is a highly sophisticated biological antenna. What if I told you that what happens inside your head when you close your eyes is not just a localized biological event? Ancient Buddhist cosmology maps out the universe in a way that is vastly different from modern astronomy. It does not measure distance in light years or galaxies. It measures reality in frequencies of consciousness. Right now, we are existing in the Kamaloka, the realm of desire, friction, gravity, and relentless exhaustion. But just above this frequency, there is a completely different dimension, the Rupa Brahma realms, the fine material world. These are not physical places you can travel to in a spaceship. They are dimensions of pure luminous geometry. In the Brahma realms, physical exhaustion simply does not exist. Entropy, the breakdown of cells, the heavy dragging weight of biological fatigue, none of it exists there. It is an environment of pure, self-sustaining light and absolute, unshakable bliss. And here is the secret that completely shattered my understanding of human potential. These 4 stages of jhana, these deep meditative absorptions, are not just psychological states, they are the exact vibrational matches to the Rupa Brahma realms. They are completely identical.
When you train your mind to enter the first, second, third, or fourth jhana exactly at the moment your physical body crosses the threshold into sleep, you are no longer just a human resting on a mattress. You are literally turning the dial on your biological antenna. You are tuning your entire nervous system to the frequency of the Brahma realms. Your physical body goes into a profound suspended animation, but your consciousness anchors itself in a dimension of zero friction. You are quite literally feeding your physical cells with cosmic light. The biological reboot that happens here is so deep, so profound, because for those few hours, your mind is operating outside the laws of ordinary human physics. I'll be completely honest with you, and I know this might sound a bit extreme to some, but I am absolutely convinced that modern medicine and science will eventually discover that the most advanced form of cellular healing does not come from a laboratory, a pill, or a biohacking machine. It comes from this exact process: frequency matching the mind to these higher cosmic states while the body sleeps. I firmly believe that. I really don't see any downside to this ancient technology. But then again, maybe that's just my own radical conclusion. I've spent a long time studying the correlation between the four jhanas and the specific tiers of these Brahma realms, but this cosmology is incredibly vast and complex. I'm certain there are people listening right now who have studied the profound depths of the 31 planes of existence far more extensively than I have. I'm genuinely fascinated to know how those of you with that deep cosmological expertise view this exact mechanism. How the human sleep cycle can act as a direct bridge to these higher celestial frequencies. Because as I think about this macro-micro connection, I keep coming back to a rather haunting thought. If entering jhana during sleep tunes us to a divine, frictionless dimension where we are entirely awake and energized, then what exactly is our physical waking life? Is this chaotic, exhausted human experience the actual reality, or is that luminous, high-frequency Brahma state our true home, and this heavy, waking human life is actually just a very long, exhausting dream? I still haven't found a clear answer for myself on which one is the true reality. If you had to drop a single word to describe the idea of your consciousness vibrating at the frequency of a celestial realm while your physical body sleeps in a dark room, I wonder what that word would be. For me, the word is boundless. Let us step out of the cosmos for a moment and come back down to Earth. Let us look directly into the bone vault of the human skull. If we are going to understand how ancient meditative states can hack our biological reboot, we first have to understand what rest actually is from a purely scientific perspective. Most people think of sleep as a passive state, a state of doing nothing, but biologically, deep sleep is one of the most violently active, heavily regulated processes your body ever undergoes. For decades, scientists could not figure out how the brain actually cleans itself. Every other organ in the human body relies on the lymphatic system to clear out dead cells and waste, but the brain is entirely sealed off behind the blood-brain barrier. It was a complete biological mystery. Until very recently, when researchers discovered a hidden plumbing network inside our heads called the glymphatic system. When you lose consciousness and drop into deep, slow-wave delta sleep, something extraordinary happens. The actual physical structure of your brain cells shrinks by up to 60%. They contract, and by shrinking, they open up these hidden microscopic pathways. Once the gates are open, cerebrospinal fluid rushes through these newly formed channels like a high-pressure wave, washing away the toxic metabolic waste that your brain has generated all day long. One of the primary toxins it flushes out is a protein called amyloid beta. Whenever you are awake, thinking, stressing, or just processing information, your brain produces this protein as a byproduct of neural activity. If you do not enter deep, high-quality sleep, the brain cannot shrink, the fluid cannot wash it away, and this amyloid beta begins to clump together into sticky plaques. These exact same plaques are the primary biological markers for Alzheimer's disease and massive neurodegenerative decline. Without this deep reboot, your brain literally suffocates in the toxic ash of its own thoughts. I remember a period in my own life where I was sleeping maybe 3 or 4 hours a night, grinding away, convinced I was outworking everyone and being highly productive. But after a few weeks, I started experiencing this terrifying, heavy brain fog. It felt like my thoughts were trying to move through thick, dark water. My memories started slipping. I was literally experiencing the physical accumulation of these neurotoxins because I was denying my brain its basic wash cycle. I have to wonder if anyone else listening has ever pushed themselves into that dangerous zone of chronic sleep deprivation and felt that exact same toxic cognitive sludge. It is an incredibly unsettling feeling when you realize your own biological hardware is starting to fail you. And this nightly housekeeping goes even deeper than the brain. While the cerebrospinal fluid is washing your neural pathways, every other cell in your body is initiating a process called autophagy. This literally translates to self-eating. Your cells hunt down their own damaged, mutated, or dead components and consume them, recycling the waste for energy. It's absolute biological alchemy. At the exact same time, your mitochondria are working in absolute overdrive to restore ATP, which is the fundamental energy currency of human life. You are not just resting in that dark room, you are being dismantled at the cellular level, cleaned, and meticulously put back together. I've spent a massive amount of time dissecting the mechanics of the glymphatic system and cellular autophagy, trying to map out exactly how slow-wave sleep triggers this deep clean. But I know for a fact that there are clinical neurologists, cellular biologists, or serious medical biohackers listening to this right now who understand these metabolic pathways far deeper than I ever will. I am genuinely fascinated to know how those of you with that hard clinical expertise view this specific mechanism, this nightly shrinking and washing of the brain. I'm sure there are layers to this biological machinery that I haven't even begun to scratch the surface of. But as I look at this violent, incredibly sophisticated reboot process, it brings up a deeply philosophical, almost unsettling question. If our brain requires this massive, profound physiological shutdown every single night just to wash away the toxic residue of our own daily thinking, it really makes me wonder, are our normal, everyday, chaotic thoughts inherently toxic to our biology? If we somehow lived our waking lives in a pure, stress-free state of meditative awareness, generating zero mental friction, would the brain even accumulate all this neuro-waste in the first place? I still haven't found a definitive answer for myself on that. I can't decide if rapid biological decay is just an inevitable part of the human condition, or if it's a direct, measurable result of how chaotically we choose to use our minds. If you had to drop a single word to describe the idea of your brain physically shrinking in the dark to wash away the toxic residue of your own daily thoughts, I wonder what that word would be. For me, the word is humbling.
We know the brain needs that violent, mechanical wash cycle to clear out the toxic ash of our daily thoughts. But let us look at the actual electrical storm happening inside the skull while this biological reboot takes place. If we're going to crack the code on how jhana hacks the sleep cycle, we have to look at the raw data. When you fall into ordinary, deep sleep, your brain waves slow down drastically. You enter the realm of delta waves. It's a slow, heavy, rolling rhythm. The frequency drops dramatically. From a conscious perspective, the lights are off. Nobody is home. You are biologically vulnerable and psychologically absent. For a long time, the medical world believed this was the only way the human nervous system could truly recover: complete, unconscious surrender. But then, modern neuroscience began to look at the brains of people who do not surrender to the dark. This is not just ancient mythology anymore. Researchers like Dr. Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin and Dr. Judson Brewer have spent years strapping advanced meditators, monks who have spent tens of thousands of hours mastering deep absorption, into high-density EEG machines and fMRI scanners. What they found completely shatters our conventional understanding of what human rest is supposed to look like. When you look at the readout of an ordinary person in deep sleep, you just see those slow, rolling delta waves. But when an advanced practitioner shifts their mind into deep jhana, the machines record a complete biological paradox. The EEG still shows that slow wave baseline. Their heart rate plummets. Their respiration drops to almost imperceptible levels. Their body is exhibiting the exact biological signature of profound, deep-stage physiological sleep. But riding right on top of that slow wave, spiking with incredible, almost violent intensity, is high-amplitude gamma synchrony. Gamma waves are the fastest, highest-frequency brain waves we possess. They're the biological signature of hyperfocus, peak insight, and intense conscious processing. Usually, you only see them when a person is deeply engaged in solving a complex problem or experiencing a sudden burst of extreme clarity. Yet here are these practitioners, their bodies essentially paralyzed in a state of suspended animation while their brains are electrically vibrating at the highest possible frequency of human awareness. The lights aren't just on, the entire architecture of the mind is blindingly illuminated. I have spent countless hours staring at these EEG readouts, trying to wrap my head around how a brain can simultaneously exhibit profound unconscious rest and hyperconscious gamma synchrony. But I know for a fact that there are clinical neurologists and cognitive researchers listening to this right now who understand these specific brainwave architectures far better than I ever will. I am incredibly curious to know how those of you with that hard clinical background interpret this paradox. How do you biologically explain a brain that is entirely asleep and maximally awake at the exact same time? Because the implications of this paradox lead to a revelation that should fundamentally change how we live our lives. There's a landmark study published in the journal Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. The researchers wanted to know what happens to the human sleep cycle when you possess this kind of neurological hardware. They found that experienced meditators require significantly less sleep than the rest of the general population. And they're not sleep deprived. They're not walking around like zombies running on cortisol and caffeine. The study concluded that deep meditative states provide a significantly higher quality of psychophysiological rest than ordinary non-REM sleep. Because they're bringing the hyper-efficient, high-frequency gamma state into the biological resting phase, the reboot happens faster. It happens deeper. They are entirely optimizing the wash cycle. They don't need 8 hours of unconsciousness because they're not fighting through the heavy sludge of delusion and stress to repair their cells. When I look at this data, I can't help but wonder something deeply unsettling. If we can physically and neurologically rest deeper in a few hours of highly conscious jhana than we can in 8 hours of heavy unconscious delta sleep, what exactly are we doing with those extra hours we spend unconscious, in bed? Are we biologically designed to be asleep for a third of our entire lives? Or is sleep, as we experience it, simply the heavy price we pay for being distracted all day?
So we have this incredible paradox. A brain that is entirely asleep, yet vibrating with hyper-conscious gamma waves. But if the mind is operating at such a blindingly high frequency, how does the physical body actually rest? Doesn't that kind of intense mental activity burn massive amounts of energy? This is where we have to look at the master control switch of human biology, the autonomic nervous system. Most of us go to bed in a state of subtle, continuous sympathetic dominance. We are stressed, we are anxious, we are mentally replaying every friction of the day. Even when we finally lose consciousness out of sheer exhaustion, our cortisol levels are still humming in the background. The fight or flight system never fully powers down. We are essentially trying to repair a highly complex machine while the engine is still running hot. But when you cross the threshold of sleep while actively entering the first jhana, you trigger something entirely different. You trigger a total parasympathetic override. In the ancient texts, the first jhana is defined by two very specific, overwhelming factors: piti, which translates to a profound physical rapture, and sukha, an intense, unshakable mental bliss. When you read these words in the scriptures, they sound like poetic spiritual metaphors, but biologically, neurologically, they are highly specific chemical triggers. When the mind successfully locks in to piti and sukha, the brain initiates a massive, localized dump of endogenous opioids, dopamine, and serotonin. It is an overwhelming, euphoric chemical cocktail that your body produces entirely on its own without a single external substance. This internal chemical flood acts as a biological kill switch for stress. It instantly and violently crushes cortisol. It forces the nervous system into extreme rest and digest mode. Because the stress hormones are completely neutralized, your basal metabolic rate plummets to a level that ordinary sleep can rarely, if ever, achieve. Your breathing becomes so shallow it is almost imperceptible. The heart slows down to a deep, rhythmic, incredibly efficient crawl. Your physical organs, finally freed from the toxic background static of fight or flight hormones, begin to repair themselves at a drastically accelerated rate. You are no longer just resting, you are engaging in accelerated biological regeneration driven entirely by your own self-induced neurochemistry. This reminds me of a very dark period in my own life when I was dealing with severe burnout. I remember lying in bed at 3 in the morning, trying absolutely everything to force my body to sleep. I took the supplements, I blacked out the room, I played the white noise, but my heart would just pound against the mattress. I was completely exhausted, but my nervous system was locked in survival mode. It wasn't until I stopped trying to force the biological act of sleep and instead focused entirely on generating that internal state of mental stillness and sukha that the physiological lock finally snapped open. I really wonder if anyone else listening has ever experienced that terrifying sensation of being physically paralyzed by your own stress hormones in the dead of night. If I had to make a definitive claim right here, I am absolutely convinced that 90% of modern insomnia is not a sleep disorder at all. It is a cortisol disorder. We have simply forgotten how to manually switch off our own survival mechanics. But that is just my conclusion. I really do not understand why so many people continue to rely purely on external sleep aids, synthetic chemicals, and heavy medications when we have this incredibly potent built-in chemical pharmacy waiting to be unlocked in the mind. When I think about this massive dump of endogenous opioids and serotonin happening while the body lies perfectly paralyzed in the dark, it leaves me with a very strange realization. What if the most intense, profound physical healing a human being can ever experience doesn't come from the external world at all? What if the absolute peak of biological euphoria is hidden right there inside the architecture of a perfectly conscious sleep?
We know why the biological reboot is necessary, and we have seen the incredible neurochemistry that happens when the nervous system enters that profound state of rest. But the most critical question remains: how do you actually get there? Where is the door? The truth is, you walk right past this door every single night of your life. There is a very specific, incredibly narrow window of time that occurs right as you are falling asleep. You lie in the dark, your breathing slows down, and your mind begins to drift. Suddenly, you might see random geometric shapes, flashes of faces, or hear a fragmented piece of a conversation that makes absolutely no sense. Modern science calls this the hypnagogic state. It is the twilight zone, the exact borderline where the waking world dissolves and the sleep cycle begins. This is a direct, personal experience of mine. I remember the very first time I tried to actively hold my awareness through this twilight zone, instead of just letting myself pass out. My physical body started to feel incredibly heavy, almost like it was sinking into wet concrete. And then, out of nowhere, I heard this loud, rushing sound, almost like a jet engine roaring right inside my own head, followed by a violent sensation of falling. My entire body convulsed, and I woke up gasping for air. It was a hypnic jerk, but magnified by 10. I really wonder if anyone else listening has ever encountered these intense, almost hallucinatory moments, the sudden jolts, the phantom sounds, or that terrifying feeling of paralysis right on the very edge of sleep. For the vast majority of humanity, this chaotic, fragmented zone is the signal to surrender. The sensory input gets too weird, the body feels too heavy, and so we just let go. We black out. We lose consciousness and plunge directly into the dark, heavy sleep of delusion. But for a practitioner of jhana, this hypnagogic threshold is not a place to black out. It is the launch pad. They do not fight the hallucinations. They do not fight the heaviness of the body. Instead, they anchor their mind to one highly specific, laser-focused object. In the ancient texts, this is called the Nimitta, the mental sign. When a mind is deeply concentrated, completely free from the 5 hindrances, and the physical senses begin to shut down, the mind starts to generate a visual representation of its own stillness. For most advanced meditators, the Nimitta appears as a light. Sometimes it is a brilliant, glowing disk. Sometimes it looks like a radiant morning star, or a luminous pearl resting in the dead center of the mind's eye. This is where the absolute magic of the biological hack takes place. As the physical body initiates REM atonia, the chemical process that paralyzes your muscles so you don't act out your dreams, the meditator does not fragment. They do not lose themselves in the dark. They take their entire localized awareness and they merge it completely with that brilliant nimitta. They do not fall asleep. They step into the light. They cross the threshold with perfect clarity, leaving the paralyzed physical body behind on the mattress while the consciousness locks into a dimension of pure, radiant stillness. When you really think about the mechanics of this crossing, I cannot help but wonder something deeply philosophical. If this brilliant, luminous light is always there, waiting for us right at the absolute edge of sleep, why is ordinary human biology wired to make us black out seconds before we reach it? Is the darkness an absolute biological necessity, or is it just a massive psychological defense mechanism because we are simply too afraid of our own light? I still cannot find a clear answer for myself on why we are so addicted to unconsciousness.
So here is the actual mechanism. This is the exact step-by-step breakdown of how you hack the biological shutdown. You are lying in the dark. Your body is settling into the mattress. At this exact moment, your brain is preparing to release a flood of neurochemicals, specifically GABA and glycine, to switch off your motor neurons. This is a survival mechanism. It is called REM atonia. Your brain literally paralyzes your physical body so you do not thrash around and act out your dreams. For a normal person, this paralysis happens after they have already lost consciousness. But to enter jhanic sleep, you have to stay awake while the paralysis sets in. You have to watch your own body die to the waking world. To do this, you need an anchor.
You cannot just float in the dark, or the mind will naturally hallucinate and pull you into a dream. You have to use a highly specific focal point. Most practitioners use anapanasati, the continuous, unbroken mindfulness of the breath. You watch the physical sensation of the air moving in and out, feeling it get shallower and shallower and shallower. Alternatively, some use metta. They generate an intense, concentrated frequency of loving kindness, a literal biological warmth in the center of the chest, and they hold on to that feeling like a lifeline. As you hold this anchor, the body starts to get heavy, incredibly heavy, and then the paralysis hits. This is a direct personal experience of mine. I remember the first time I remained entirely conscious as my body went into REM atonia. It felt like a lead blanket was dropped over my chest. I couldn't move my arms. I couldn't move my legs. My instinct was absolute panic. The primal brain started screaming that I was suffocating, that I was trapped inside a corpse. I had to force myself to completely surrender to the paralysis, to just watch it happen without reacting. I really don't know if anyone else has ever experienced that terrifying sensation of sleep paralysis, whether by accident or on purpose, where your mind is fully awake but your biological vehicle is completely dead to the world. It is a wildly unsettling threshold to cross. But if you do not panic, if you maintain your anchor on the breath or that feeling of metta, something miraculous happens. You perform a surgical separation. In Buddhist philosophy, there is rupa, which is the physical form, the meat, the bones, the biology, and there is nama, the observing mind, the consciousness. Usually, these two are glued together. If the body is tired, the mind feels tired. If the body goes to sleep, the mind goes to sleep. But right here, at the exact onset of REM atonia, you cut the tether. Because your mind is so intensely focused on the nimitta, on the breath or the light, it stops processing the physical body entirely. The rupa shuts down. The heart rate drops. The breathing becomes so faint it is almost undetectable, and the cells begin their deep biological wash cycle. The body is officially asleep, but the nama, the mind, steps entirely out of the physical sensory world and falls forward into the jhana. The breath vanishes. You are no longer observing a physical sensation because you no longer have a physical body in your awareness. You are just resting in piti and sukha, pure rapture and pure stillness. You are completely disconnected from the heavy, exhausted biological machine lying on the bed. You are floating in a state of luminous absorption, completely awake, utterly pristine, while the biological vehicle below you repairs itself on autopilot. I have read countless manuals on this exact separation of rupa and nama, but the deeper I go into this practice, the more I realize that the actual experiential reality of it defies human language. I am absolutely certain there are deep practitioners listening to this right now who mastered this exact threshold, who know how to slip out of the physical senses without a ripple of fear. I am deeply fascinated to know how those of you with that level of meditative mastery experience that exact microsecond when the physical body clicks off and the mind becomes completely weightless. Because when I think about that profound separation, I'm left with a staggering thought. If we can completely detach our conscious awareness from the physical body every single night and exist purely as luminous, blissful mind, then who is the entity waking up in the morning? Are we the body that just slept? Or are we the light that was watching it the whole time?
So you are floating in this pristine, luminous state. The physical body is entirely paralyzed below you, running its deep biological wash cycle. The rupa is resting and the nama is illuminated. But eventually, the reboot has to finish. The question is, how do you come back? How do you wake the biological machine without shattering the stillness of the mind? For most of the modern world, waking up is an act of violence. We rely on loud, screeching digital alarms that instantly spike our cortisol levels and rip us out of the unconscious void.
We wake up groggy, disoriented, suffering from what science calls sleep inertia. It takes us hours and usually multiple cups of coffee just to drag our heavy biology back into a functional state. But when you are resting in jhana, there is no sleep inertia, because you never actually went to sleep. You are already completely awake. You just have to command the physical body to turn back on. The ancient texts detail a highly specific mechanism for this. It is called adhidhana, a definitive mental resolution. Before you cross the threshold to REM atonia, before you separate the mind from the physical form, you plant a razor-sharp, time-stamped intention into the deepest layer of your awareness. You literally program the internal biological clock. You do not hope to wake up. You set the exact, precise minute you intend to open your eyes, and then you let the body fall away. This is a direct personal experience of mine. I remember the very first time I tried to ditch my digital alarm clock and rely entirely on this mental programming. It was a complete failure. I completely overshot my target, woke up hours late and jolted out of bed in an absolute panic. I realized that my mind was far too chaotic when I planted the suggestion. The intention wasn't anchored deeply enough before the body powered down. It took me a long time to learn how to lock that command into the mind while maintaining absolute stillness. I really wonder if anyone else listening has ever experimented with this. Have you ever tried to wake up at a highly specific time using nothing but pure mental intention? I know for a fact some of you out there must have experienced that strange, almost eerie sensation of your eyes snapping open exactly 1 minute before your physical alarm goes off. It is a profound feeling when you realize your internal chronometer is infinitely more precise than your phone. When you master this adhidhana within the jhanic state, the awakening process is completely redefined. You do not get dragged up from the heavy, suffocating darkness of normal sleep. You simply lower your luminous awareness back down into the physical form. The rupa and the nama smoothly resync. The chemical paralysis of the body dissolves instantly. You open your eyes, and the transition is entirely seamless. There is no brain fog. There is no heavy, lingering delusion. Because your brain spent the night bathed in high-frequency gamma synchrony and deep parasympathetic rest, you emerge feeling physically rebooted. Your cells have been completely flushed of neurotoxins. Your ATP energy stores are maximized. The biological vehicle is electric, and the mind is absolutely terrifyingly pristine. You sit up in bed, and because you never lost consciousness, it feels as if not a single second of time has actually passed. It brings up a really strange, haunting realization about how we actually perceive time. If your physical body is entirely paralyzed and your mind is completely absorbed in a timeless, frictionless dimension, yet somehow a hidden part of your consciousness tracks the exact physical minute in the waking world to bring you back perfectly on schedule, what exactly is keeping the score? If you had to drop just one single word in the comments to describe the exact feeling you want the very second you open your eyes tomorrow morning, what would it be? For me, the word is crystalline. I'm incredibly curious to see what your word would be.
Let us leave the ancient texts and the cosmology for a moment. I want to pull this entire concept out of the isolated Himalayan cave and drop it directly into the hyper-competitive modern world of Silicon Valley. Right now, there is a multi-billion-dollar industry obsessed with exactly what we are talking about today, the ultimate biological reboot. If you look at elite tech founders, billionaire CEOs, and Olympic athletes, you will notice a massive shift in how they view rest. They are absolutely terrified of biological decay and cognitive decline. So what do? They try to hack the human sleep cycle using external hardware. They wear titanium rings and biometric straps to track every single heartbeat.
They spend tens of thousands of dollars installing sensory deprivation tanks in their homes. They use guided yoga nidra, or what the tech world now calls non-sleep deep rest, trying desperately to manually trigger the parasympathetic nervous system. They are throwing infinite amounts of money and technology at a biological problem, trying to force the brain into the exact high-efficiency wash cycle that the ancient monks mastered thousands of years ago in absolute silence. I will be completely honest with you, and this is a direct personal experience of mine. I used to be deeply caught in this exact biohacking loop. I wore the trackers. I would wake up in the morning, and before I even took a deep breath, I was staring at a screen, waiting for an algorithm to tell me if I was actually rested. If the app said my REM or delta sleep was low, I would immediately feel exhausted, even if I woke up feeling fine. I outsourced my own internal biological awareness to a piece of plastic and a Bluetooth connection. I don't know if anyone else has ever found themselves trapped in that weird modern paradox where you're trying to optimize your health, but you end up developing this strange, anxious dependency on a sleep tracking app just to validate your own existence in the morning. If I have to make a definitive claim right here, I am absolutely convinced that relying strictly on these external gadgets is a trap. I really do not see how we can evolve if we keep treating our bodies like broken machines that need to be constantly monitored by external software. I firmly believe that the modern sleep tech industry, as advanced as it is ultimately just a very expensive crutch for a lost internal mechanism. Think about what a sensory deprivation tank actually does. You float in body temperature salt water, in pitch blackness, in total silence. What is the goal? The goal is to artificially remove all sensory input so you can forcibly separate the rupa from the nama, the physical body from the observing mind. Think about yoga nidra. What is the objective? To keep the mind mathematically tethered to a voice recording while the physical body drops into REM atonia. These are incredibly clever modern tools, but they are entirely synthetic. They're trying to recreate the jhanic sleep protocol from the outside in. But the meditator sitting in the Himalayan cave or lying perfectly still on a thin mat on a wooden floor doesn't need a $5,000 pod. They don't need a titanium ring to measure their heart rate variability, because jhana is the ultimate, pure internal biohack. It requires absolutely zero external technology. The hardware is already built into the bone vault of your skull. The software is your own razor-sharp attention. The neurochemical triggers, the endogenous opioids, the massive drop in cortisol, all of it is synthesized internally on demand. You are the laboratory. You are the technology. When you strip away all the modern terminology, biohacking is just the desperate modern pursuit of what the ancients called liberation. We just replaced the word enlightenment with optimization. But as I watch the modern world try technologically to force its way into these deep regenerative states, I keep coming back to a very strange, almost unsettling thought. If we have to rely on artificial intelligence, biometric rings, and saltwater isolation pods just to remember how to properly fall asleep, what have we actually become? Have we reached the peak of human technological evolution, or have we simply become the most biologically disconnected species to ever walk the earth?
We have looked at the biology, the brain waves, and the modern chase for optimization. But let us step back and look at this through the lens of pure existential philosophy. What does the night actually mean? What is the true nature of this state we enter every 24 hours? The Western mind has spent centuries struggling to explain the blank, empty space of the night. Arthur Schopenhauer, one of the most brilliant and notoriously pessimistic philosophers of the West, argued that sleep is a small daily installment we pay to purchase our eventual death. He famously wrote that sleep is a fragment of death borrowed beforehand,
a temporary dissolution of the intellect where we return to the blind, unconditioned will. To Schopenhauer, we are only truly safe when we are asleep, because that is when our fragile ego temporarily ceases to exist. Decades later, the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung took a different path. He saw sleep as a descent into the great primordial ocean of the unconscious mind. To Jung, the dream state is not just a biological error, it is a vital, living landscape. It is where the conscious ego submerges itself to heal, speaking in the ancient language of archetypes, myths, and symbols. Both of these men believed that to sleep is to enter a state of unconsciousness. But Buddhist metaphysics rejects this entire premise. According to the Abhidhamma, consciousness never actually turns off. There is no such thing as an unconscious mind in the Western psychoanalytical sense. Consciousness is not a light switch that gets flicked into the dark. It is a continuous, unbroken, lightning-fast stream. It doesn't disappear, it only changes its objects. When you fall into a heavy, dreamless sleep, your consciousness has not ceased to exist. It is simply registering the Bhavanga, the baseline continuum. But because your mind is clogged with Moha, with delusion, you are not aware of what the stream is flowing through. You experience it as a blackout. I have spent a long time studying Jungian archetypes and Schopenhauer's essays on the metaphysics of sleep and death. But I know for a fact that there are deep students of psychoanalysis and continental philosophy listening to this right now. I am genuinely fascinated to know how those of you with that specific Western background reconcile Jung's concept of the collective unconscious with the Buddhist concept of continuous, unbroken consciousness. Is what the West calls the unconscious simply our name for the parts of the stream we are too distracted to see? Because when you look at this through the Eastern lens, the mathematics of human life completely transform. Think about the staggering reality of your lifespan. We spend roughly 1/3 of our entire existence in bed. If you live to be 90 years old, you will spend 30 years of those sleeping. 30 years. If we sleep in total delusion, we are effectively dead to ourselves for 3 decades. We're throwing away 30 years of potential spiritual evolution, letting our minds wander through chaotic, stressful dreams or a dark, blank void. But if you master jhanic sleep, if you keep the thread of awareness burning through the night, you reclaim those 30 years. You turn the dark, wasted void of the night into a continuous, highly active laboratory for spiritual awakening. You double your conscious lifespan. While the world is blacked out, you are meditating in pure, blissful light. And as I look at this vast, profound difference between how the East and West view the night, I am left with a deeply haunting riddle. If Schopenhauer was right, and sleep is just a small daily sample of death, then what actually is death? Is death just an infinite, unconscious blackout? Or is death the ultimate, final jhana, the moment where the physical body permanently clicks off and the consciousness is finally, completely liberated into pure, unconditioned light? I still cannot find a definitive answer for that for myself. I still cannot decide whether sleep is preparing us to disappear into nothingness or preparing us to truly wake up. When we talk about these concepts, it is completely natural for the logical mind to push back. We want to test this. We want to find the gaps, to ask the hard questions, to search for the catch. And we absolutely should. So let us look directly at the most common, most complex questions that arise when we try to bridge ancient conscious sleep with modern biology. First, there is a question I hear almost constantly. Is this just lucid dreaming? It is a completely fair question. In both states, you are technically asleep, yet you are aware of your own existence. But structurally, neurologically, and spiritually, they are entirely different beasts. Lucid dreaming happens exclusively during REM sleep, which is a state of intense neural activity. It is the realm of what the ancient texts call papancha, conceptual proliferation. In a lucid dream, you are still projecting images. You are still flying through skies, fighting dream monsters, talking to projection characters, and ultimately feeding the ego's desires. Your mind is incredibly busy. But jhana is the absolute opposite of proliferation. It is non-conceptual, deep, singular absorption. There are no dreams. There are no visual landscapes. There are no dream characters to interact with. It is a state of pure, motionless, luminous stillness that actually mirrors deep NREM slow-wave sleep. If lucid dreaming is like playing a highly advanced, infinite virtual reality video game, jhana is turning the console off entirely while keeping the electricity running through the room. Then there is the very real question of safety and health. Will I become sleep-deprived if I keep my mind awake? Will this drive me crazy? I have to be completely honest with you here, and we have to address a highly dangerous trap that exists in the modern spiritual community. There is a massive life or death difference between forcing yourself to stay awake, which ruins your circadian rhythm, causes sleep deprivation, and can literally trigger psychosis, and allowing your physical body to sleep while your mind rests in jhana. I have seen so many people fall into the trap of toxic productivity, disguised as high-level meditation. They try to cut their sleep down to 3 or 4 hours a night using sheer willpower, drinking caffeine, and fighting their biological limits, thinking it makes them spiritually advanced. It does not. It just makes them clinically exhausted, emotionally volatile, and physically sick. This is spiritual bypassing at its absolute worst. Jhana is not about sleeping less through force. It is about resting deeper through surrender. But then we have to look at the most common, most practical roadblock of all. How can I possibly do this when I cannot even sit still and meditate for 10 minutes during the day? This is a direct personal experience of mine. For years, I absolutely detested traditional meditation. I would sit on a cushion, my back would ache, my knees would scream, my mind would race through 100 different worries, and 10 minutes felt like 10 hours of pure, unadulterated torture. I failed at it repeatedly. It wasn't until I stopped trying to be a perfect, disciplined meditator during the day, and instead focused entirely on the last 3 minutes before I closed my eyes at night, that the biological lock finally opened. You do not need to sit in a cave for hours to start this. When you lie down tonight, just make a silent, gentle agreement with yourself. For the last 3 minutes of your day, as your head sinks into the pillow and your body begins to feel heavy, do not let your mind drift into random thoughts about tomorrow, yesterday, or what you need to do. Just hold your attention on the soft sensation of the breath at the tip of your nose. If the mind drifts, gently, without judgment, pull it back. Just 3 minutes. That's how you build the initial neurological bridge. If I have to be completely blunt about this, I believe that if we cannot even master the final 3 minutes of our waking day, we cannot expect to have any real control over the rest of our lives. We spend so much energy planning our careers, our diets, our social lives, and our retirements, yet we completely ignore the profound, quiet gateway to our own consciousness that opens up to us every single night. It's an incredibly strange, almost tragic paradox. We want to control the entire external world, but we're absolutely terrified of consciously stepping into the transition of our own minds. We have traveled a vast, incredible distance to get to this exact point of understanding. We started under the canopy of ancient forests, studying the lion's posture of the Buddha, and we mapped that exact posture directly to the physical paralysis of REM atonia. We dived deep into the micromechanics of the Abhidhamma, uncovering the Bhavanga-citta, the baseline hum of human consciousness, and watched how ordinary sleep drowns it in the dark, heavy mud of Moha, while samadhi transforms it into a self-sustaining, luminous wave. We looked at the stars, mapping our human jhanas to the high-frequency dimensions of the Brahma realms before dropping right back down into the microscopic pathways of our own brains. We watched the glymphatic system wash away toxic amyloid beta plaques like a high-pressure wave in the dark, and we realized that the massive dump of endogenous opioids and serotonin in the first jhana is the ultimate parasympathetic override. When you bring all these puzzle pieces together, the grand picture becomes undeniable. The human body is a miraculous, self-healing biological machine. It is designed to rebuild itself, to purge its own toxins, to consume its own damaged cells, and to fully optimize its longevity. But a machine is only as good as the software that runs it, and your mind, your attention, is the software. Jhana is simply the ultimate administrative reboot protocol. You do not need to run from the physical body, and you do not need to fight your own biology with expensive external gadgets. You just have to learn how to operate the controls. You have to remember how to run the code. This brings us to the ultimate ancient warning left behind by those who successfully mapped this terrain. In the Dhammapada, the collection of the Buddha's most direct wisdom, verse 21 states, "Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. The mindful do not die. The heedless are as if already dead." When you lie down tonight, in the quiet, undisturbed dark of your room, you are not just preparing to take a break from your day. You are preparing to step to the very edge of the great mystery. You are stepping onto the borderline of life and death, of consciousness and unconsciousness. And as the room grows cold and quiet, I am left with one final lingering riddle. If we spend a third of our entire lives practicing unconsciousness, practicing how to disappear into the dark, are we actually preparing ourselves to live? Or are we slowly, night after night, rehearsing how to die without ever realizing we were asleep? If you have walked this entire path with me, I want you to make a choice. If you had to select just one single keyword to describe the commitment you are making to your own awareness tonight, what is that word? For me, the word is awake. Write your word down. Let it be the last thing you commit to before the lights go out. May you all progress in the Dhamma. We look forward to seeing you on the next occasion. Goodbye.